On day one of his second term, President Donald Trump once again signs an executive order to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement.
The next item here is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty.
As he signs, cheers echo from the crowd. The U.S., they say, will save trillions of dollars.
We're going to save over $1 trillion by withdrawing from that treaty.
It's surreal, almost more so than when he first declared "drill, baby, drill" in his inaugural speech.
That's why today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill.
Trump had campaigned on it constantly. And now, once re-elected, he delivered on that promise to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Back in 2017, when he made that decision for the first time, it sent shockwaves throughout the global community. But 4 years later, the climate community in the US has learned to adapt, to expect it. So now, as the moment becomes history, how prepared are the experts and advocates? And what's next for the American role in the global climate action? Let's dig into that. I'm Fei, and this is Climate Watch, the podcast where we explore big climate questions with insights from experts and industry insiders. My goal is to help you better understand our planet and inspire action, whether big or small. By the way, I've also launched a newsletter on Substack called Rivers and Mountains. You can find me there too. When the American climate community is prepared and expect Donald Trump to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, I think the crucial question here is what the community is going to do under this new administration. And more importantly, how will this shift impact the collaboration between the US and China on climate change? To explore this, I sat down with Melissa Barbanell, director of the U.S. International Engagement at the World Resources Institute. She leads high-level dialogues on climate and energy with U.S. non-governmental leaders and their counterparts in China, India, and the European Union. Over the past 4 years under Joe Biden, they had made a lot of promises under UNFCCC, especially when it comes to the nationally determined contributions or the NDCs under the Paris Agreement. And I think Biden has already published the NDC goals. Do you think under this new presidency that these goals will be met, or will they be undermined by the new president and their administration?
So the new NDC has been submitted by the Biden administration, and it sets goals for 2035. And so while the Donald Trump presidency will be for the next 4 years, it won't last, obviously, we expect, as long as 2035. So given that, there's still possibility to meet the commitments. That being said, it is expected that the new administration's policies will slow down progress on meeting the new NDC, but we do think it may still be possible to meet them. You know, there's a lot of activity going on right now. There's subnational progress that's been happening. It's estimated that subnational action alone and other non-federal action could result in a 54 to 62% decrease in emissions by 2035, regardless of federal administration action. And even while the Trump administration may not lift a finger to deliver on the plan, the NDC sets a North Star for what the U.S. should be aiming for and could help guide future administrations, as well as states and cities, on what needs to happen.
On a personal level, are you worried that with the new president and the new administration coming into office, a lot of the goals will definitely start to seeing setbacks, especially when it comes to climate policies or other industries related to reduce carbon emissions?
I would say, yes, I'm concerned, but I do anticipate that we're moving in the right direction, and I believe a lot of that movement is not stoppable. Mm-hmm. You know, we've seen action by industry, commitments to take action. There are incentives in place for the change to a clean energy economy. We know that states and cities are really taking significant action So, yes, it's concerning, but there's a lot of reason to believe that things will still happen as they are really designed to happen now. Right now, we know that there are 24 states that are part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, and they represent 54% of the population, 57% of the U.S. economy. Those states have collectively committed to achieving net zero no later than 2050. 21 states have made significant commitments regarding transportation. 13 states have joined the Buy Clean partnership. So there's a lot of action happening at the state level. And just like when Trump was president before, I think that the states are going to really lead. And the states are, of course, much better positioned to lead now than they were when Trump became the president last time. They've really spent the last 8 years learning what to do and getting their, commitments in place and have jumped in and really are, I hope, where we're going to see a lot of action as well as the private sector.
So you think that probably in the future, at least for the next 4 years, a lot of the actions will be taking place on state levels or even city levels, on business levels. But after all, U.S. is a federal country that a lot of actions will definitely need to be led by a larger government body like the federal government. So do you think, for example, if the federal government decided to prioritize fossil fuel production, what sort of impacts will that bring to the state level or city level efforts that are trying to go green or going to net zero?
It's one way I believe the U.S. and China are different. I think in China, a lot of the policy really is very top down. In the United States, you do have federal policies and federal laws, but oftentimes there is an ability for states to really be much more ambitious and much more protective than the federal government. So the U.S., while we are a federal system, the states have much more capacity to kind of chart their own course. I would say that even if the administration prioritizes fossil fuel production, investment in renewable energy will continue to grow. The cost of solar in the United States is less expensive than fossil fuel-fired power. The production tax credits from the IRA will continue to encourage development of solar, wind, and battery storage projects. Over the last 4 years, coal has decreased from 50% to 16% of the energy mix. We're seeing, incredible investments from the IRA, over $390 billion in clean energy. So there's really, I do think the direction of travel is pretty well set, and there's just so much reason to continue on with clean energy that while we will likely see an increase in fossil fuel production, we will also continue to see increases in clean energy.
And the last time, I think during COP29, when I was speaking to climate experts, I also asked them whether they are concerned about, Trump coming into office would hamper global climate actions. And they said they had high hopes because of this Inflation Reduction Act. I'm wondering that after Trump come into office, is it politically or procedurally possible for him, if he want to reverse or undermine these legislation?
So really, the indicator for the ability to undermine the Inflation Reduction Act, it's with the Trump administration, but it also relies on Congress. The president cannot undo existing law, but Congress can. The IRA is particularly vulnerable because it was created through reconciliation. In the U.S., we have a lot of sort of checks and balances, and in the U.S. Senate, to pass most laws, you require a 2/3 majority of the Senate. However, reconciliation is an expedited process which allows the enacting of legislation on taxes, spending, and the debt limit with only a simple majority. So because the IRA was created using reconciliation, reconciliation can also be used to get rid of it. That being said, while it might be feasible legally, legislatively, to get rid of the IRA or big parts of the IRA, politically, it seems unlikely. We've already had letter from 18 House Republicans back in August supporting the IRA energy tax credits. And there are also additional congressmen and women who do support the IRA. So while it might be possible, it seems very unlikely politically. And this is because the IRA and its tax incentives, about 80% of those have been deployed in Republican congressional districts. Republican legislators have attended ribbon cuttings in their districts. These new projects are a boon to their economies. They are employing many, many people. Some examples about the sort of record-breaking private sector investment is really interesting because not only is the government spending happening in the districts, but we're seeing that it's unleashing significant private sector spending. So in Arizona, they have unleashed $120 billion in private sector investment. So this includes a $5.5 billion battery factory. In California, they've added over 2 million new jobs and more than 45 billion in private sector manufacturing and clean energy. In Georgia, they've mobilized more than 40 billion in private sector investment, including a facility from the German company Q-Cell to expand its solar panel and component manufacturing capacity. Pennsylvania, another sort of state that's very mixed, has unleashed nearly 4.3 billion in private sector money. So we're seeing that these incentives created through the IRA have really had a knock-on effect when it comes to the economy in these places. And so that makes it very politically unpopular to get rid of them, which I think makes it likely that it will stay.
So it makes sort of economic sense to keep going with the current legislation or the plans in place. But I think it's also sending really mixed messages out there. As you mentioned, a lot of the Republican represented states or districts are actually promoting clean energy or climate-related industries. But then at the same time, when we look at, for example, the new lineup of the new administration, I think a lot of concerns are being voiced is because of the officials listed out there do not have the record of going green. I don't know, what could the private sector, for example, the businesses who are creating the jobs, who are contributing to the growth in economies, will respond to this new lineup in the new administration? Are they going to be prepared for some kind of a plan B?
Well, I don't think they need a plan B. I mean, the private sector, as long as the incentives stay in place, they really can carry on doing what they're doing. I think that we'll see the administration, you're absolutely right that the lineup that we're seeing is very much not climate friendly, but they're very interested in the economy. They're very interested in housing. And so there's a range of issues really that we could see where there's an opportunity to come together. I don't think that there will be policies in place that will prevent the private sector from doing what makes it money. The U.S. is very concerned about GDP. So I think that while you're absolutely right about the lineup of people we're hearing about, it's not likely to really put the brakes on the clean energy economy. I think that we will see changes in the enforcement regimes and other things, and really just less of a priority. The more nascent areas like hydrogen, potentially could be at risk. I think that, we'll still see investment in CCUS. We'll still see investment in nuclear. We know that the private sector has been really involved. We're seeing with the AI data centers, companies like Microsoft investing in nuclear. So there's a lot going on. The way that it works is that we should not see a dramatic impact on the private sector.
So they won't necessarily be trying to stop the current investments, but they probably want to promote more proactively when it comes to this sort of climate-friendly industries or new investments.
That's correct. But I believe that most of the credits that have been created through the IRA related to clean energy are probably going to stay because the Republican Congress is not going to agree to get rid of it. So a lot of the things that were created through the IRA during the Biden administration are likely to stay in place.
But do you see any new further potential areas that could maybe see a new round of growth in the next 4 years when it comes to, for example, renewables or technologies linked to carbon reduction?
I can imagine that things like battery production, critical minerals, onshoring and friendshoring will likely continue to be promoted. So I think that where there is a perceived competitive risk or competitive advantage, that the US government will likely continue to invest. The hydrogen economy is really starting. And the US has been a leader in that space so far. It might want to continue to capitalize on that if it's perceived as economically a good idea or geopolitically a good idea. So I don't think it's all going to get thrown away.
For me as a Chinese, also for China, that cooperating with the US in climate actions has always been very important. And over the past 4 years, we've actually seen a lot of steps forward when it comes to China-US climate cooperations. Do you see that these cooperation will continue under the Trump administration?
It's very hard to predict. I would say I agree with you. The steps forward through the Sunnyland Statement really were significant. What I do know is that there really remains significant appetite for collaboration with China and other countries. Organizations like the World Resources Institute, many other civil society organizations, many universities, I expect will continue to be at the forefront of that engagement. We know from the last Trump administration that joint university research will carry on. It did during that administration. Informal dialogue will carry on. Through our work, we know that there are shared challenges related to CCUS, renewables deployment, energy efficiency, long-term storage, that both the US and China are grappling with the same questions and many of the same challenges. We believe that there remains opportunity for knowledge sharing in both directions on all of these topics. And it can be one thing that occurs that at the subnational level or with non-track one actors. So you might not have US government to Chinese government engagement that's happening very directly, but I anticipate there will be much engagement that will continue. There's a lot of commitment in this country at a lot of levels to continue working together. I think that people in the United States recognize the imperative of working with China, recognize, that China and the US as the two largest emitters and the two largest economies have a commitment really to lead in this space. And that leadership will impact what the rest of the world chooses to do. So I do think that engagement will continue. I'm not sure how much at the track one level, and it's really very hard to predict what will happen at the track one level. I mean, while Donald Trump is really interested in competitiveness questions, I don't know where he will wind up in terms of being willing to kind of work together. It might be the case that the competitiveness drives improved performance in both countries. And that's the hope and the aspiration.
And do you see that, for example, if the Trump administration really starting to step back when it comes to climate actions from the US, are there any ways for example, national level or international level organizations can pressuring on the US to remain committed to their climate goals and start to taking real climate actions?
I think that we know that it's very important for the United States to meet its new targets. But we also know that the US is a relatively small contributor to global emissions at present. It emits about 10% of the total emissions. And so other countries, will hopefully be setting ambitious targets aligned with their own net zero goals. And by that action, that should be part of the question. But, directly, I think that the Trump administration is not likely to respond to direct pressure from other nations or international bodies, but it will be influenced by competition in key technologies such as nuclear power, geothermal, hydrogen, CCS. These are all things that will be important for climate. Other countries probably can best influence the United States by continuing to make clear the economic imperatives and benefits of climate action, particularly the green technology revolution. We expect that the venues where other countries might be able to wield access with the US could be in the G20 or the G7. And then, through subnational diplomacy, there's other opportunities. So there's a range of ways, but I do think that it's going to all be within the frame of competition over emerging technology.
The new administration will not yield under the peer pressure, but more of a peer competition that will drive them to go green and develop related technologies or industries.
That's correct.
As someone working for WRI, the World Resources Institute, you've been focusing a lot on environmental protection and also cooperations among countries in this field. Will your organization start to prepare for some kind of impacts brought by this new administration?
Absolutely. I would say that civil society in the United States has been thinking very hard about what the new administration means and how best to prepare to continue to push forward to address climate change. The World Resources Institute is definitely part of that. WRI will continue to engage internationally, and the Paris Agreement and international climate cooperation is going to remain central. And so, even though the Trump administration may abdicate its roles and responsibilities, which will sideline the United States.
I'm really curious about the last time, during Trump's last term, what kind of changes did he bring to you at that time?
So, I think that what we saw during the last Trump administration is that the importance of action by civil society was critical, and WRI plays a certain kind of role in the US civil society ecosystem. We engage internationally, we engage domestically, we will continue to support states and cities that are implementing the IRA. We work with cities that are working on getting electric buses. So there's our kind of organization, and then there's other members of US civil society who were exceptionally busy during the last Trump administration. While there was a proposal to overturn many, many regulations from the previous administration, those were fought in the courts, not by World Resources Institute, but by other civil society organizations. And most of those challenges, stopped regulations that would change the laws and weaken the laws here. So there's going to be a lot of action. There's going to be really a banding together of civil society, and it will be across the board organizations like ours that are working politically and internationally, other organizations that are working on litigation strategies. There's going to be more effort to strengthen subnational action. I mean, the really big, significant change, I would say, during the last Trump administration was the emergence of the subnational actors on the global stage on climate. These folks are now well prepared. They started from scratch in 2017.
The US now has organizations like the US Climate Alliance, like you mentioned, and with experiences back in 2017, they have protocols or preparedness ready to welcome this new US president coming into office.
And, I would say that what we've seen, not only do they have experience, but people who will be leading these organizations going forward have national level experience. So, for instance, Gina McCarthy, who is a former US EPA administrator and was one of the White House climate advisors to the Biden administration, is leading America's All In, which is another subnational action group. So we have a lot more sophistication on the subnational level. So when it comes to climate particularly, I expect to see a significant amount of the activity being taken up internationally by those folks and domestically. When it comes to climate as well as other environmental protections, I expect that we will see, certain other groups that want to litigate proposed weakening of rules stepping into the fray. You will see organizations like WRI continuing to engage and support communities that are looking to implement existing regulations, as well as doing the research to support new proactive steps. We believe that there's a range of topics where we can continue to work. We can work on hydrogen, we can work on CCUS, we can work on nuclear, we can work on minerals and batteries and supply chains. And so there's a range of topics that even under the new Trump administration, WRI intends to engage domestically in the United States and really believes that we can make a difference and build the case for why continued climate action or action that supports climate, which we may not call climate action, is in the interest of the country.
So regardless of what direction this new administration will take, the civil society, the public, the businesses, or even governments at state or city levels will continue their path in climate actions and achieving their climate goals. Do you see
That's
that
correct.
the same monument will be carried out when it comes to, for example, cooperations with China in climate actions?
I think that we will continue to see civil society engagement. We will continue to see academic engagement. We'll continue to see subnational engagement. One thing that I think that we need to foster more is the private sector. That being said, private sector engagement is already happening. I think that it will continue. I mean, I think that the private sector has kind of led in this space, but they've operated on a different track than civil society largely. And I do think that for civil society to be most effective, we need to be engaging with industry, which I think will continue to cooperate.
As we look to the future, one thing remains pretty clear. Climate change doesn't pause for politics. Whether it's Trump, Biden, or anyone else, the planet continues to warm. And in the end, it's not the decisions of one man or even one nation that will define our climate future. It's the collective action we choose to take or not take as a global community. So the question isn't just what will the US do next? It's really what will we all do next? The clock is ticking, and it doesn't really care who is in the White House. A huge thank you to Melissa Barbanell with the World Resources Institute for sharing her insights, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of Climate Watch. If you have any questions about climate change or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out at fei.fei@cgtn.com, fei.fei@cgtn.com. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to check out my Substack newsletter, Rivers and Mountains. Stay curious and, more importantly, stay hopeful.